What if one of the oldest books ever written about heaven, angels, and the end of the world was deliberately erased from your Bible? That is not a conspiracy theory. That is history. And the story behind it is more disturbing than most people realize. The letter of Jude, tucked near the back of the New Testament, contains a direct quote. Jude 1:14 says that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about the Lord coming with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment. That verse does not come from Genesis. It does not come from Psalms. It comes from a book that most Christians today have never been told exists, the Book of Enoch. And here is what makes this so unsettling. Jude treated that book as real prophecy. He quoted it as truth. Yet the book he quoted was later thrown out of the Bible by councils of men who decided it did not belong. Most people assume the Bible has always contained the same 66 books. They believe the table of contents was settled from the beginning. But that is not what happened. The Bible was assembled over centuries through arguments, votes, and political pressure. And during that process, an entire tradition of sacred writing was silenced. The Book of Enoch survived in only one place on earth, hidden in the highlands of Ethiopia, preserved by a church that refused to let it die. In this story, we are going to uncover three things. First, we will trace how this ancient book was lost to the Western world and why one church held onto it when every other tradition let it go. Then, we will enter the world Enoch describes, a world of rebel angels, forbidden knowledge, and giants who terrorized the earth. And finally, we will ask the hardest question of all. What if the forces Enoch warned about never actually went away? What if they are still at work right now, and the clues are scattered across Scripture for anyone willing to look? And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. The Book of Enoch is old. Scholars estimate parts of it date back to the 3rd century before Christ. That makes sections of it older than the Book of Daniel. Older than some of the Psalms in their final written form. It circulated widely among Jewish communities before the time of Jesus. Fragments of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, confirming that Jewish scribes studied it, copied it, and treated it as important literature. The early church fathers knew it well. Tertullian defended it. Clement of Alexandria referenced it. Irenaeus drew from its imagery. For the first few centuries of Christianity, the Book of Enoch was part of the conversation. Then something shifted. As the Roman Empire consolidated its grip on Christianity, church leaders began narrowing the list of approved scriptures. The Council of Laodicea in the 4th century played a role. So did Jerome, the man who translated the Bible into Latin. Jerome viewed Enoch with suspicion. He questioned its origins. He doubted its age. Augustine, one of the most influential theologians in Western history, added his own reservations. He worried the book's content about angels mating with human women was too strange, too dangerous for common believers. And so, piece by piece, Enoch was pushed aside. Not because it was proven false, but because it was deemed too uncomfortable. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles south, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church preserved a different biblical tradition. Their canon includes 81 books. Among them sits the Book of Enoch, called First Enoch, treated as holy scripture for over 1,500 years. Ethiopia's geographic isolation played a part in this. Cut off from the debates of Rome and Constantinople, Ethiopian Christians followed their own path. They kept texts that the West discarded. And when European explorers finally reached Ethiopia in the 18th century, they were stunned to find a complete copy of Enoch sitting in a monastery, intact, preserved in the ancient language of Ge'ez. If you think about it, that is remarkable. A book quoted in your New Testament, studied by early Christians, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, survived only because one nation on earth refused to follow the crowd, and that survival was not accidental. Ethiopian tradition holds that the book was brought to their land during the time of King Solomon, carried along the same route as the Ark of the Covenant. Whether you accept that tradition or not, the fact remains. The Book of Enoch endured against all odds, and its contents explain why powerful people wanted it gone. Subscribe if you want to understand the parts of the Bible others left out. Because what Enoch recorded about the angels is unlike anything you have heard in church. The question is not really about one book being in or out of a list. The question is about what that book reveals. Enoch does not simply repeat the stories of Genesis. It expands them. It fills in the gaps. It answers questions that the Standard Bible leaves wide open. Why did God send the flood? Who were the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6? What happened to the giants after they died? And why does the New Testament treat the spiritual world as an active battlefield? The Book of Enoch addresses every one of those questions, and the answers are not what you expect. But before we can understand what Enoch saw, we need to go back further. We need to return to a time before the flood, before the corruption, before the rebellion. We need to return to the garden itself and understand who was standing guard at the gates of Eden and what went wrong when those guards abandoned their posts. Chapter 2. The Watchers at the Gate. There is a detail in Genesis that most people read right past. After Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden, God places cherubim at the east of Eden. Genesis 3:24 says a flaming sword turned every direction, guarding the way to the tree of life. Most readers treat that as a simple ending to the Eden story. The gate is closed. Humanity is out. End of chapter. But the Book of Enoch suggests something far more complex was happening at that boundary. Eden was not just a garden. It was a threshold, a meeting point between heaven and earth, and the beings assigned to guard it were not decoration. They were soldiers in a cosmic order that most of us have never been taught. The Watchers were a specific class of heavenly beings. Their name in the original language tells you their function. They watched, they observed. They stood at the border between the divine realm and the human world, and their job was to maintain the separation. According to Enoch, these angels were stationed near Eden after the fall. They were given a clear command: watch over humanity. Do not interfere. Do not cross the line between heaven and earth. Observe the human story as it unfolds and report back to the throne of God. This is where the story gets fascinating. Eden, according to ancient Jewish and early Christian thought, was not just a patch of land with fruit trees. It was a cosmic temple. The garden was the place where God's presence dwelled on earth. Adam was not simply a farmer, he was the first priest. His job was to tend and keep the garden, and those Hebrew words, Abad and Shema, are the same words used later in the Torah to describe the duties of Levitical priests in the tabernacle. Adam served in the garden the way priests served in the temple. He walked in the presence of God. He had access to the tree of life, which represented unbroken communion with the Creator. When Adam and Eve sinned, that access was revoked. The temple was sealed, and the Watchers were placed at the perimeter. Think of it this way: if Eden was the holiest place on earth, the Watchers were the angelic security force assigned to keep the boundary intact. They were trusted with the most sacred assignment in creation: guard the line. Protect the separation between the holy and the profane. Do not let anything pass that should not pass. Like if this story is already changing how you see Genesis, because we are only getting started. Now, here is what the Book of Enoch adds that Genesis does not. The Watchers were not robots. They were beings with awareness. They could see, they could feel, they could desire, and over time, as they watched humanity from their posts, something shifted inside them. They saw human women. They saw beauty. They saw the warmth of human connection, the intimacy of families, the tenderness between husbands and wives. And a longing grew in them that was never supposed to exist. This is one of the most controversial points in all of ancient scripture. Can angels desire? Can heavenly beings feel attraction? The Book of Enoch says yes, and that desire became the seed of the greatest rebellion since Lucifer's fall. But we need to be careful here. The text does not describe this as a sudden impulse. It was a slow erosion. The Watchers did not wake up one morning and decide to abandon their posts. They watched, day after day, year after year, generation after generation. They observed humanity living the life they could never have. And slowly, the boundary they were meant to protect became the boundary they wanted to cross. There is a profound lesson buried in this part of the story. The Watchers failed not because they were weak. They failed because they were placed at the edge and told to look but never touch. Their sin began with their eyes. It grew in their hearts, and it culminated in a decision that would reshape the entire course of human history. The very beings entrusted to guard the sacred boundary became the ones who violated it. Scripture gives us a principle that echoes through every generation. Boundaries exist for a reason. When God draws a line, crossing it always carries consequences. The Watchers knew the line. They knew their assignment, and they chose to step over it anyway. That choice did not just affect them. It unleashed a chain of events that corrupted civilization, filled the earth with violence, and forced God to intervene with the most devastating judgment the world has ever seen. But before that judgment came, the Watchers had to make their decision official. They had to commit, and the place where they sealed their fate was not hidden. It was a mountain, a real mountain, one that still stands today in the land of Israel. And what happened on that mountain is one of the most chilling scenes in all of ancient literature. Comment below if you have ever heard of Mount Hermon before, because what the Watchers did on that peak changes everything about how we understand the Bible's story of evil. The garden stood sealed, the Watchers stood at their posts, and for a time the order held. Heaven above, earth below, angels watching, humans living. The system worked as designed, but the system depended on one thing: obedience. It depended on the Watchers choosing their duty over their desire. And that is exactly where the system broke, not with a dramatic battle, not with fire from the sky, but with a quiet, internal shift in beings who are supposed to be incorruptible. The Watchers looked at what they were guarding and decided they wanted it for themselves, and that wanting changed everything. Chapter 3. The Oath on Mount Hermon. The Book of Enoch names the place. It names the mountain. It even names the leader. And that level of detail is part of what makes this ancient text so unsettling. This is not a vague myth. It reads like a historical report from someone who was there when the worst decision in angelic history was made. Mount Hermon sits at the northern border of ancient Israel. It rises over 9,000 feet, capped with snow, visible for miles in every direction. In the ancient world, mountains were considered meeting points between heaven and earth. The higher you climbed, the closer you came to the divine realm. Hermon was the tallest peak in the region, and according to 1 Enoch chapter 6, it was the place where 200 Watchers descended from heaven and swore a binding oath to carry out their rebellion. The leader's name was Semyaza. He was afraid. The text makes that clear. Semyaza knew what they were about to do was a violation of the highest order. He feared that the others would back out and leave him to bear the punishment alone. So he made a proposal. They would all swear together. They would all swear together. They would bind themselves with a mutual curse. If one fell, they all fell. If one was punished, they all shared the blame. It was a pact of shared guilt, and every one of the 200 agreed. That detail matters. This was not a moment of weakness. This was premeditated, calculated. The Watchers knew exactly what they were doing. They discussed it. They debated it. They made a collective decision, and they sealed it with an oath on the summit of a holy mountain, turning a place that should have represented closeness to God into the launchpad for the greatest act of angelic treason the world had ever seen. The Book of Enoch lists many of their names: Azazel, Barachiel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel. Each one had a specialty. Each one carried specific knowledge from the heavenly realm, and each one made the conscious choice to abandon heaven and enter the world of flesh. They did not fall by accident. They walked down that mountain with full intention. Share this with someone who thinks the Bible is a simple book, because this part of the story proves it is anything but simple. Now consider the timing. The Watchers descended during a specific period in human history. Humanity was still young. Civilization was growing but fragile. People were learning to farm, to build, to organize into families and communities. They were vulnerable. They trusted what came from above. And when 200 glowing, powerful beings walked down from the peak of Mount Hermon, humanity did not run. They welcomed them. They had no reason to fear. These were angels, after all, messengers of God, guardians of the sacred. How could anything from heaven be dangerous? That trust was the Watchers' greatest weapon. They did not arrive with swords, they arrived with gifts. They came offering knowledge, beauty, power, and humanity. Still young and still trusting, accepted everything they brought. The Watchers took wives from among human women. The text says they chose whichever ones they wanted. There was no courtship in the human sense. There was selection. These beings, towering in stature and radiant with heavenly power, simply chose. And the women they chose bore children that were not fully human. But the mating was only part of the transgression. In many ways, it was not even the worst part. The greater crime was what the Watchers taught. Because when they came down from Hermon, they did not just bring their bodies into the human world. They brought heaven's secrets. They opened doors that were never meant to be opened. And behind those doors was knowledge that humanity was not ready to handle. Genesis 6:5 tells us that after this period, the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That is one of the most devastating verses in the entire Bible. Every thought, only evil continually. Something had gone catastrophically wrong with the human race, and the book of Enoch explains exactly what caused it. It was not just sin in the ordinary sense. It was contamination, corruption injected directly from the heavenly realm into the human world through beings who should have known better. The oath on Hermon was the trigger. 200 angels standing on a mountaintop swearing to cross the line together. It sounds like something from a horror story, but according to the ancient text, it happened, and the consequences were beyond anything those Watchers could have imagined. Yet the knowledge they released is what truly changed the world. Not the marriages, not the children, the knowledge. Because once that door was opened, it could never be closed again, and what poured through it corrupted everything it touched. Subscribe now, because the next chapter reveals exactly what the Watchers taught humanity and why some scholars believe those teachings are still affecting us today. Chapter 4: Forbidden Knowledge. The Book of Enoch does not speak in vague terms about what the Watchers revealed. It gives us a list, a detailed, specific catalogue of the knowledge that was handed down from heaven to earth. And when you read that list carefully, it becomes clear that this was not random information. It was a systematic transfer of power that changed the trajectory of human civilization. Azazel taught humans how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He showed them how to forge metal into instruments of war. Before Azazel, according to the text, humanity resolved conflicts in simpler ways. After Azazel, warfare became an industry. Armies formed, weapons multiplied, violence scaled up from personal grudges to organized slaughter. One angel's teaching turned scattered human aggression into something systematic and deadly. But Azazel did not stop at weapons. He also taught the art of cosmetics and ornamentation. He showed women how to beautify themselves with paints and dyes, how to fashion bracelets and jewelry from precious metals and stones. At first glance, that seems harmless, but the text connects it directly to the rise of vanity, seduction, and moral corruption. The implication is clear. Azazel did not just give humanity tools, he gave them the means to weaponize beauty itself. Appearance became power, attraction became manipulation, and the simplicity of human relationships was replaced by something calculated and corrupt. Other Watchers taught different arts. Barakiel taught astrology, the reading of the stars. Kokabeel taught the signs of the constellations. Tamiel taught the signs of the sun. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. These were not innocent astronomy lessons. In the ancient world, reading the heavens was tied directly to divination, to predicting the future, to claiming power over fate. The Watchers gave humanity the tools to practice sorcery. They handed over the keys to occult knowledge that was never meant for mortal minds. And then there was Penny-Moo. His contribution might seem less dramatic at first, but scholars argue it was the most dangerous of all. Penny-Moo taught humans the art of writing with ink and paper. Now, you might think writing is a gift, and in God's timing, it certainly became one. The Torah was written, the Psalms were written, the words of the prophets were written. But the Book of Enoch frames Penemu's teaching as premature and corrupted. Writing, in this context, was not given to preserve truth, it was given to amplify lies. It allowed false teachings to spread faster. It enabled the recording and distribution of sorcery, manipulation, and forbidden rituals. The pen, in the wrong hands and at the wrong time, became a weapon as destructive as any sword Azazel forged. Like if you never realized how deep this goes. Because most people have never been told this part of the story. Here is the pattern that emerges when you step back and look at the full list. Every single thing the Watchers taught had a dual nature. Weapons can defend, but they also destroy. Beauty can inspire, but it also destroys. Knowledge of the stars can produce wonder, but it also produces false worship. Writing can preserve wisdom, but it also spreads poison. The Watchers did not give humanity inherently evil things. They gave humanity powerful things before humanity was mature enough to handle them. And that premature gift is what caused the collapse. Think about it this way. A match is not evil, but a match in the hands of a child in a room full of dry wood is a catastrophe. The Watchers handed matches to a civilization still in its infancy, and the world caught fire. The corruption spread fast. Genesis 6:1 says the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. That violence was not random. It was the direct result of angelic knowledge entering human hands without divine permission. Humanity did not evolve into wickedness slowly over centuries. It was accelerated, pushed forward by knowledge that came from outside the natural order. The Watchers short-circuited God's plan for human development and replaced it with their own agenda. The text does not say the Watchers wanted to destroy humanity. Their motives appear more complex. They wanted to experience humanity. They wanted to build something with the creatures they had been watching for so long. But good intentions do not change bad outcomes. The road to the flood was paved with angelic desire and human vulnerability. The Watchers meant to elevate humanity. Instead, they dragged it into a darkness so deep that God himself declared the experiment over. Yet there is a question that haunts this part of the narrative. If the Watchers taught these things thousands of years ago, are those teachings truly gone? The weapons remain, the vanity remains, the sorcery remains. The power of the written word to spread both truth and lies remains. Some scholars suggest that the legacy of the Watchers is woven into the fabric of human civilization itself. That every war, every act of occult practice, every manipulation of beauty for corrupt purposes carries a faint echo of what began on Mount Hermon. Comment your thoughts below. Do you believe the Watchers' influence ended with the flood, or is it still with us? But the teachings were not even the most terrifying consequence of the Watchers' descent. The children born from the union of angels and women were something the world had never seen before. They were something the world was never meant to see. And when those children grew, the earth trembled under their feet. What they became and what they did is the subject of the next chapter, and it is far worse than you might think. Chapter 5, Children of the Fallen. Genesis 6:4 is one of the most debated verses in the entire Bible. It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. That is all Genesis gives us. A few sentences, a brief mention of giants and heroes, and then the story moves straight to the flood. But the Book of Enoch does not rush past this moment. It lingers, it describes, and what it describes is a nightmare. The children born from the union of the Watchers and human women were called the Nephilim. The word itself is debated, but most scholars connect it to the Hebrew root, meaning to fall, the fallen ones, the offspring of the fallen angels. And according to 1 Enoch, these beings were enormous. The text described them as giants whose height reached 300 cubits. Now, even if that number is symbolic rather than literal, the point is unmistakable. The Nephilim were not ordinary children. They were hybrid creatures, part angel, part human, and entirely beyond the natural order of creation. At first, the Nephilim consumed the food humans produced. They ate the crops, they drank the water, They consumed the resources of the communities around them. But as they grew, human food was not enough. The text says the Nephilim turned on the people. They began to devour human beings. They drank blood. They consumed flesh. The giants became predators, and humanity became their prey. That is not a metaphor. The Book of Enoch presents this as literal description. The Nephilim were monsters, not because they chose to be, but because they were never supposed to exist. They were the product of a union that violated the fundamental order of creation. Heaven and earth were meant to remain separate. When the Watchers crossed that line, the result was a race of beings that belonged nowhere, too large for the human world, too physical for the angelic realm, caught between two natures and driven by appetites that could never be satisfied. Share this video with someone who has never heard the full story of the Nephilim, because what comes next will shock you. The violence the Nephilim caused was not contained. It spread across the earth like a plague. Communities that had once lived in relative peace were shattered. Families were torn apart. Entire regions were depopulated as the giants consumed everything in their path. And the Watchers, the fathers of these creatures, did nothing to stop it. They had abandoned heaven for earth, and now earth was becoming a wasteland because of their children. But there is a deeper horror hidden in this part of the story. The Nephilim were not just physically destructive. They were spiritually contaminating. Their very existence represented a corruption of the human bloodline. God had created humanity in His image. The Watchers introduced angelic DNA into that bloodline. The result was a race that was neither fully human nor fully angel, and that corruption threatened to spread until no pure human bloodline remained on earth. This is where the story connects directly to Noah. Genesis 6:9 says Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. That word blameless is interesting. The Hebrew word tamim can mean morally upright, but it can also mean physically whole or genetically intact. Some scholars believe this verse is telling us that Noah's bloodline had not been contaminated by the Nephilim. He was not just a good man, he was a genetically pure man, the last of his kind in a world that had been corrupted from the inside out. If that reading is correct, then the flood takes on an entirely new dimension. It was not just a punishment for sin, it was a rescue operation. God was not simply angry at humanity's wickedness, He was preserving the human race itself. The Nephilim were consuming the world. The angelic corruption was spreading through the bloodline. If nothing was done, the image of God in humanity would be permanently distorted. The flood was the only way to reset the board and save what was left. Yet here is the question that keeps scholars awake at night. Genesis 6:4 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. Afterward. That word implies the Nephilim, or something like them, existed after the flood. How is that possible if the flood destroyed every living thing? The Book of Enoch does not answer this directly, but the Bible itself offers clues. When the Israelite spies entered Canaan centuries later, they reported seeing giants. Numbers 13:33 says they saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak, and they felt like grasshoppers in comparison. Some traditions suggest the Nephilim bloodline survived through Noah's daughters-in-law. Others propose that the Watchers or other fallen angels repeated the transgression after the flood. The text leaves room for debate, but the implication is haunting. The Nephilim problem was not solved once and for all by the flood. It lingered, it resurfaced, and it continued to threaten God's plan for humanity long after the waters receded. Like and subscribe if this is opening your eyes to a story you have never heard told this way, because the flood itself is only the midpoint of this narrative. What happened to the Nephilim after they died is where the story turns truly dark. Their bodies perished, but their spirits did not. And what those spirits became is something that affects every person alive today, whether they know it or not. Chapter 6: The Flood and the Spirits. The flood is the most famous act of divine judgment in the Bible. Every child who attends Sunday school learns the story. Noah builds an ark. Animals march in 2 by 2. Rain falls for 40 days. The world is washed clean. But that version of the story skips the reason behind the judgment. It treats the flood as a punishment for general wickedness. The Book of Enoch says it was much more specific than that. The flood was God's response to a cosmic invasion, an intervention designed to destroy beings that should never have existed and to purge a corruption that had infected the human race at the deepest possible level. First, Enoch chapters 10 through 16 describe how the cry of the earth reached heaven. The blood shed by the Nephilim soaked into the ground. The violence was so extreme that creation itself groaned under the weight of it. The earth, in the language of Enoch, filed a complaint before the throne of God, and God responded. He sent his archangels, each with a specific mission. Raphael was sent to bind Azazel, the watcher who had taught humanity the arts of war and vanity. He was cast into darkness, into a hole in the desert of Dudail, covered with sharp stones, sealed until the day of final judgment. Michael was sent to bind Semiaza and the rest of the rebellious watchers. They were imprisoned in valleys of the earth, locked away in chains of darkness, held until the great day when they would face eternal sentencing. The punishments were severe, but notice something important. God did not simply destroy the watchers. He imprisoned them. They are still being held, according to the text. Jude verse 6 confirms this from within the New Testament itself. It says the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority but left their proper dwelling, God has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. That is a direct reference to the watchers. Jude is telling his readers that the angels from the Book of Enoch are real. Their rebellion happened, and their punishment is ongoing. Now here is where the story takes its darkest turn. The Nephilim were destroyed in the flood. Their massive bodies drowned along with the rest of corrupted humanity. But according to 1 Enoch chapter 15, their spirits were a different matter. God speaks directly to the watchers in this passage and explains the fate of their children. Because the Nephilim were born from the union of immortal spirit and mortal flesh, their spirits could not die when their bodies perished. They were trapped between worlds. They could not ascend to heaven because they were part human. They could not rest in death because they were part angel, and so their spirits were condemned to wander the earth as evil spirits, demons. That statement is staggering in its implications. The Book of Enoch is telling us that the demons described throughout the New Testament, the spirits Jesus cast out, the forces Paul warned believers to resist, are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. They are not fallen angels in the traditional sense. The fallen angels, the watchers, are locked in chains. The demons are their children, homeless spirits roaming the earth, seeking bodies to inhabit, driven by hungers that can never be satisfied because they belong to a race that was never meant to be. Subscribe for more revelations like this, because most churches will never tell you where demons actually come from. This reframes the entire New Testament understanding of spiritual warfare. When Jesus encountered a man possessed by a legion of demons in Mark chapter 5, those spirits begged not to be sent out of the region. They asked to be sent into a herd of pigs instead. Why? Because they needed physical hosts. They craved embodiment. They were spirits born from flesh, and they longed to return to it. The Book of Enoch explains that craving, these are not abstract forces of evil. They are the remnants of a hybrid race, desperate and restless, haunting humanity because they have nowhere else to go. The flood killed the bodies, but the spiritual contamination survived. And this is the terrifying truth that the Book of Enoch forces us to confront. The judgment of the flood was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new phase. The physical giants were gone, but their spiritual offspring remained, and they remain to this day, according to the framework that Enoch lays out. Every act of demonic oppression, every case of spiritual torment, every dark presence that has plagued humanity through the centuries traces back to the same source: the children of the Watchers, the ghosts of the Nephilim. Yet even this is not the complete picture, because the flood solved one problem but revealed another. The physical corruption was washed away, but the spiritual battle intensified. The demons had no more giant bodies to inhabit, so they turned to human ones, and the war that began on Mount Hermon entered a new phase. one that would stretch across millennia and reach into every corner of human civilization. The question that remains is whether that war is still being fought, and the answer, according to both Enoch and the New Testament, is yes. It never stopped. The battlefield shifted, the tactics changed, but the enemy remains the same. And the next chapter will show you exactly how that ancient war continued long after the floodwaters receded, in places you would never expect. Chapter 7. The War That Never Ended. Most people think the story of the Nephilim ends with the flood. The water came, the giants drowned, problem solved. But the Bible itself tells us otherwise, and when you follow the thread from Genesis through the conquest of Canaan, a pattern emerges that is impossible to ignore. The war that began with the Watchers' descent on Mount Hermon did not end in Noah's day. It continued for centuries, and Israel was placed directly in the center of it. When Moses sent 12 spies into the land of Canaan, they came back with a terrifying report. Numbers 13:32 says the land devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are of great height. They specifically mentioned the descendants of Enoch, a name connected to the Nephilim tradition. The spies said they felt like grasshoppers compared to these giants. 10 of the 12 spies were so afraid that they convinced the entire nation of Israel to refuse entry into the promised land. That refusal cost them 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. But think about why giants were in Canaan in the first place. If the flood was supposed to eliminate the Nephilim, how were their descendants living in the very land God promised to Abraham? The Bible does not give a single clean answer, but the implication across multiple texts is that the corruption resurfaced. Whether through surviving bloodlines, through a second incursion of fallen angels, or through some other means the text does not fully explain, the Nephilim problem was back, and God's solution was not another flood. This time, his solution was Israel. The conquest of Canaan takes on an entirely different meaning when you read it through this lens. The commands to drive out or destroy the inhabitants of certain Canaanite cities were not arbitrary acts of divine cruelty. They were targeted strikes against populations connected to Nephilim bloodlines. Joshua's wars were a continuation of the flood's purpose. The same corruption that drowned the world in Noah's time was growing again in Canaan, and Israel was sent in to finish what the water started. Comment below if this changes how you understand the conquest of Canaan, because this perspective transforms one of the most difficult parts of the Old Testament. Consider the specific enemies Israel faced. Og, king of Bashan, is described in Deuteronomy 3:11 as the last of the Rephaim. His bed was made of iron and measured 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. That is roughly 13.5 feet by 6 feet. Og was not an ordinary king. He was a remnant of the giant race, and his kingdom of Bashan sat at the foot of Mount Hermon, the very mountain where the Watchers made their oath. That is not a coincidence. The Bible is drawing a direct geographical and spiritual line between the Watchers' rebellion and the enemies Israel was commanded to fight. Goliath of Gath is another example. 1 Samuel 17 describes him as standing 6 cubits and a span, approximately 9.5 feet tall. He came from a family of giants. His brothers are mentioned in other passages. The Philistine champion who defied the armies of the living God was a descendant of the same corrupted bloodline the flood was supposed to eliminate, and it took a shepherd boy with a sling and a stone, empowered by the Spirit of God, to bring him down. David's victory over Goliath was not just a story about courage. It was a battle in the ancient war against the Nephilim legacy. The spiritual warfare described in the New Testament picks up this same thread. Ephesians 6:12 says our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, authorities, powers of this dark world, and spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Paul is describing a battle that stretches back to the Watchers. The demons roaming the earth are the Nephilim spirits from Enoch's account. The principalities and powers in heavenly places are the organized hierarchy of fallen spiritual beings. The war that began at Mount Hermon is the same war Paul tells believers to arm themselves for with the full armor of God. Jesus himself engaged in this warfare directly. Every time he cast out a demon, he was confronting a Nephilim spirit. every time he commanded an unclean spirit to leave, he was exercising authority over the offspring of the Watcher's rebellion. His ministry was not just about teaching parables and healing the sick. It was an invasion. The kingdom of God was breaking into enemy territory, and the enemy forces were the same ones that had been terrorizing humanity since before the flood. And this war is not over. According to the New Testament, it will continue until the end of the age. Revelation 9:14 describes a moment when 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates are released. Some scholars connect this to the imprisoned Watchers from the book of Enoch. If that connection holds, then the final chapter of the Watchers' story has not yet been written. They are imprisoned, but they will be released. And when they are, the world will face one final confrontation with the forces that have been at work since the beginning. Share this with every believer you know, because the Bible is not just a book of history. It is a battle map. And the next chapter will reveal how all of this ends and what role humanity is destined to play in the final judgment of the fallen angels themselves. Chapter 8, The Restoration of Eden. Everything in this story has been building toward one question: how does it end? The Watchers fell. The Nephilim terrorized the earth. The flood cleansed the world but did not finish the job. Giants returned. Demons remained. Spiritual warfare has continued through every generation since the waters receded. So where is this all going? The answer is found in one of the most overlooked promises in the New Testament, and it connects directly back to where our story began. Eden, 1 Corinthians 6:3, contains a statement so bold that most Christians skip right past it. Paul writes, "Do you not know that we are to judge angels?" Read that again. Humans will judge angels, not the other way around. The very race that was victimized by the Watchers' rebellion will one day sit in judgment over them. The beings who crossed the boundary, who corrupted humanity, who unleashed the Nephilim upon the earth, will stand before a court where redeemed men and women hold the gavel. That is not a metaphor. Paul states it as fact, and it ties directly to the restoration of all things. The book of Enoch describes a coming day of judgment in vivid detail. The imprisoned Watchers will be brought from their chains. They will face the Ancient of Days. Their crimes will be read aloud, and their punishment will be finalized for eternity. But here is what makes this personal. According to Paul, the saints will participate in that judgment. The people of God will play an active role in holding the fallen angels accountable. The victims will judge the perpetrators. The prey will sentence the predators. That is divine justice at its most complete. But judgment is not the end of the story. Restoration is. The Bible does not conclude with punishment. It concludes with renewal. Revelation 21 describes a new heaven and a new earth. The old order passes away. Death is swallowed up, and God makes his dwelling place among humanity. The language echoes Eden. God walking with his people. No barrier between heaven and earth. No cherubim guarding the gate. No flaming sword turning in every direction. The tree of life reappears in Revelation 22, standing on either side of the river of life, producing fruit every month with leaves for the healing of the nations. Like if you see the connection. Because the entire Bible is one story. It begins in a garden, it ends in a garden, and everything in between. The Watchers, the Nephilim, the flood, the wars, the demons, all of it is the long middle chapter of a story that was always heading toward restoration. The faithful Watchers play a role in this future as well. Not all angels fell. The vast majority remained loyal. Michael and his forces fought against a dragon in Revelation 12. Gabriel delivered messages to Daniel, to Mary, to Zechariah. Angels ministered to Jesus in the wilderness after his temptation. Hebrews 1:14 calls angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation. The loyal angels have been fighting the same war from the other side, holding the line against the forces of darkness, guarding the people of God, just as the original Watchers were supposed to guard Eden. And that brings us to the deepest layer of this entire narrative. The story of the Watchers is ultimately a story about boundaries. God created an order. Heaven above, earth below, angels in their realm, humans in theirs. The boundary existed for a reason. When the Watchers crossed it, everything fell apart. But God's plan was never to keep heaven and earth apart forever. His plan was to unite them on His terms, in His timing, through His Son. Jesus is the true bridge between heaven and earth. He is fully God and fully man. He crossed the boundary not in rebellion, but in obedience. He descended not to take, but to give. He entered the human world not to exploit it, but to redeem it. Every single thing the Watchers got wrong, Jesus got right. They came down for themselves. He came down for us. They broke the order. He fulfilled it. They corrupted humanity. He restored it. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel will continue to explore the deepest mysteries of Scripture, and there is so much more to uncover. The flaming sword that guarded Eden has been extinguished, not by rebellion, but by sacrifice. When Jesus died on the cross, the veil in the temple was torn from top to bottom. That veil represented the same barrier that the cherubim guarded in Genesis 3. The way to the tree of life was reopened, not through the force of fallen angels, but through the blood of the Lamb. Humanity was invited back into the garden, not the garden of Genesis, but something far greater, the new creation, the eternal Eden where God dwells with His people forever. The book of Enoch reminds us that the spiritual world is real, that angels exist, that some of them fell, that their fall had consequences that ripple through human history to this very day. But it also reminds us that God is not surprised by any of it. He imprisoned the guilty. He preserved the faithful. He sent His Son to undo the damage. And He promises a future where the war finally ends, the demons are silenced, the Watchers face their sentence, and the sons and daughters of Adam take their rightful place in a restored creation. That is the story the book of Enoch tells. When you read it alongside the Bible, it is a story of rebellion and redemption, of corruption and cleansing, of boundaries broken and boundaries restored. And it ends not with distraction, but with a promise. The same God who planted the first garden is preparing the last one, and in that garden there will be no serpent, no tempter, no Watchers abandoning their posts. Only the presence of God, the tree of life, and a humanity finally made whole. If this story changed how you see the Bible, leave a comment below. Tell us what surprised you most. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the Bible is not a closed book. It is a living story, and you are part of it.